From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
Kamala, you're fired.
I say, bring it on.
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America. Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us. I'm Eric Ham, and we're live in Washington, D.C. Lots to get to today, including more and more U.S. voters are making their voices heard as the early vote in this year's presidential election continues to smash records. We'll take you through all of it just on the other side of the headlines. Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates donates $50 million to the super PAC Future Forward, supporting Vice President Kamala Harris. This marks a significant change in the billionaire's previous stance of not donating to political campaigns. Secretary of State Antony Blinken leaves Israel after failing to convince Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to accept a ceasefire in Gaza. The secretary told Netanyahu Washington would oppose any Israeli occupation of Gaza. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un orders missile units to be ready for strategic action. Photos released by state media show Kim Jong-un standing in front of hypersonic and nuclear-capable ballistic missiles. A fuel tanker explosion kills at least 11, including children, in central Uganda. Police officials say 4 residential buildings and 9 shops were destroyed in the blaze. And campaigning ends in Uruguay ahead of the presidential vote on Sunday. Early polls show left-wing opposition leader Yamandu Orsi marginally ahead of the ruling party candidate Alvaro Delgado in a neck-and-neck race. We begin with the race for the White House. Early voting is now underway in more than 40 states across the United States, and over 20 million people have already cast their ballots. Democrats clearly have an edge in early voting. However, unlike 2020, Republicans are also voting in heavy numbers before Election Day.
I'm voting for Donald J. Trump, and the reason being I love his policies. I love his policies on lowering taxes, taking care of our military, that's first of all, taking care of the border. He's going to straighten that border out just like he did back in 2016.
I didn't vote for him to be the pastor of my church. I voted for him to be the president of this country. This country needs to be run like a business, and he's a businessman.
According to data from the University of Florida, about 43% of the early votes have been cast by Democrats, while around 34% have been cast by Republicans. Voter turnout has already broken records in swing states such as North Carolina and Georgia. Meanwhile, Republicans voting in person have outnumbered Democrats in Nevada, which is the opposite of what happened in 2020. This reversal comes after former President Donald Trump's change of heart as he urged his supporters to cast their ballots early this time.
We want a landslide that's too big, too big. We can't let anything happen. Early voting is underway. Get everyone out. Get everyone you know. Just get them all out to vote. Go tomorrow. After all we have been through together, we stand on the verge of the 4 greatest years in the history of our country. These will be, despite the fact that we've been set back so far by incompetent, vicious, foolish leadership, we will have the 4 greatest years in the history of our country.
Now, political parties usually want voters to turn up early so that they can be efficient and get more marginal voters at the last minute. The Republican Party excelled at convincing its supporters to vote early until 2020, when Donald Trump asked voters to wait until Election Day. After losing the White House, Donald Trump falsely claimed that Democrats cast millions of early votes and suppressed Republican votes. Meanwhile, Democrats have been embracing early voting for years, as banking these ballots helps them focus on swaying smaller groups. Now, experts have warned against drawing too many conclusions from the early vote. In fact, voting before Election Day shows how many voters registered with a party are voting rather than whom they're actually voting for. Enthusiasm is running high as polls now go out the window, as voters are finally making their voices heard all across the country. The early voting is not only giving us an early indication of turnout for both parties, but also a window into each candidate's ground operations, which could be the ultimate difference in a race that by all accounts is expected to go down to the wire. And staying with the race for the White House, over 840,000 people have voted early on Monday, setting a new record in Texas. The biggest turnouts were seen in largely blue-leaning urban areas. Over 125,000 voters cast their ballot in Harris County, home to Houston, Texas' largest city. Travis County also set a new record for early voting, with a major Democratic push seen in Austin. Thousands also voted in Bexar, as San Antonio saw a big turnout from blue voters, with many having to wait hours to cast their ballot. Large turnouts were also witnessed in Dallas and Fort Bend. Now, it's worth noting that the high number of early voting was also witnessed in counties that have a sizable blue-leaning population. In fact, President Joe Biden beat Donald Trump in these very same counties during the 2020 presidential election. In an attempt to energize the Democratic voter base, Vice President Kamala Harris will host a massive rally in Houston on Friday. The vice president will be joined by women who have been impacted by the state's extreme abortion bans after Texas overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022. This will be the Democratic presidential nominee's first stop in Texas since she clinched her party's nomination more than 2 months ago. However, Kamala Harris does face strong opposition from MAGA supporters and evangelical Christians in a state that is considered ground zero for Donald Trump.
I think most Bible-believing Christians are concerned that our families are not being protected, that children, we're having to fight for our rights to protect children from pornography, to protect children from gender modification surgeries, to protect the unborn. I think it's extremely concerning, the issues that are being pushed out by the Democratic Party. Specifically, their main talking point right now is abortion rights. That's all they're running on. And I think the American people are not there.
Either be one or two things. Either going to be some kind of judgment on our nation because we have gone so far away from God and what the Bible actually has to say about a number of different issues, or two, there'll be a great revival that takes place. And I don't know which has to happen first. Maybe the judgment happens before we have some kind of revival.
Now, Donald Trump has only made one visit to Texas since this election cycle began. Still, the former president enjoys large support from Texans who back his conservative stance on abortion, as well as his hardline policies on border security. Republicans have won Texas in each of the last 10 presidential elections, and Donald Trump won the state in 2020 with a margin of just 5.5 points. However, a new trend shows that counties with large suburban populations are shifting towards Democrats, and a state has been, until recently, overwhelmingly conservative. With its 40 electoral college votes, a presidential shift in Texas would be seismic. But more than just at the presidential level, a closer than expected U.S. Senate race in the Lone Star State is pushing Texas to the forefront in the waning days of the election. The outcome could shift the balance of power in Congress, and Harris's visit, she hopes, will do just that. And moving on from the war of votes to the war of words, the controversy surrounding foreign interference in the upcoming presidential election has gained traction once again. And this time it involves allegations from Donald Trump that members of the UK's Labour Party have been actively supporting Kamala Harris's campaign. The former president's legal team has filed a complaint with the Independent Federal Election Commission, alleging that volunteers from British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's party have potentially violated campaign finance laws. The controversy started when media reports and a now deleted LinkedIn post by the Labour Party's Director of Operations suggested that the party might be paying for accommodation for British volunteers working in the upcoming election. The complaint also references several reports that Labour officials, including Prime Minister Keir Starmer's chief of staff and Downing Street's director of communications, had visited the U.S. to advise the Harris campaign. However, Labour Party officials have strongly denied any wrongdoing. On his way to the Commonwealth Leaders Summit in Samoa, Prime Minister Keir Starmer told reporters that Labour volunteers are acting in their personal capacity and are not receiving financial backing from the party. But despite these reassurances, Donald Trump's team insists that even voluntary efforts can cross legal lines if they involve significant support or resources. Trump's legal team is calling for an immediate investigation into the matter to determine if any violations have occurred. With Donald Trump's penchant for holding grudges, it remains to be seen how the British Prime Minister will maintain relations with the United States if, in fact, the ex-president is reelected in November. And now we head south to Mexico, where the Mexican army has killed at least 19 suspected members of the deadly Sinaloa Cartel. In an overnight ambush on Monday, the army has given the Sinaloa Cartel one of its biggest defeats in recent months. President Claudia Sheinbaum promises to crack down on cartels even further. However, ordinary Mexicans are not completely on board. Will the Mexican army use the recent success to launch an all-out assault, or will the cartels rain down more terror? Here's more from the streets of Mexico.
In the late hours on Monday, the quiet suburban streets near the capital in Mexico's Sinaloa state were rocked by the crackle of gunfire. A major shootout took place between the Mexican army and one of the most deadly drug gangs in the world, the Sinaloa Cartel. The shootout took place about 11 kilometers outside the Sinaloa state capital, Culiacan. According to the Mexican Defense Ministry, the gunfire took place after more than 30 cartel gunmen fired on Mexican soldiers. As the Mexican army retaliated, they managed to shoot and kill at least 19 cartel members. The Mexican army also seized 30 firearms and military-style vests and helmets from the scene of the shootout. One cartel member was unable to flee and was arrested by the Mexican military. He has been identified as Edwin Antonio, a local leader of the Sinaloa Cartel. The latest blow to the Sinaloa Cartel faction comes amid unprecedented flare-ups of cartel violence in recent months. Between October 6 and October 15, Mexico saw the brutal killings of 2 mayors. The killings didn't stop there. An indigenous priest was also killed right after officiating Mass on Sunday. These killings have sparked widespread outrage against the newly elected president, Claudia Sheinbaum, who had vowed to crack down on cartel violence.
We have called on the government to clarify this case and bring justice to Father Marcelo, a great priest that always advocated for the poorest and for the people in need, that always listened and helped and now has been murdered. We demand all the government agencies to cooperate and give answers to clarify all these.
Before that, I would like to express that we regret the murder, the assassination of Father Marcelo Perez in San Cristobal de las Casas. The investigation is being carried out. Yesterday, the Secretary of the Interior was communicating with both the state government and the diocese and with the ecclesiastical authorities. We are coordinating to be able to advance in the investigation, and that this crime does not go unpunished.
Earlier in October, President Sheinbaum rolled out a 4-pronged approach to tackle cartel violence. But only a few of them appear to be changing the reality on ground. President Sheinbaum has emphasized on justice as a measure for peace and security in the violence-infested country.
We will reduce the number of high-impact crimes. We will because we have a strategy and will implement it. We will pay more attention than what was given by the government of President López Obrador to certain topics, and we still believe that security and peace are the result of justice.
It is like this in Chilpancingo and throughout the state. The situation is truly critical. Perhaps the rest of the country doesn't know it. I invite Mexican Minister of Security Omar Hamid Garcia Harfuch and President of Mexico Claudia Sheinbaum to come here, and not just from behind a desk, to uncover the truth.
According to official data, gang violence in just the Sinaloa state has left around 200 people dead since early September. More than 300 others are believed to be missing. The spiraling violence is linked to drug trafficking and cartel rivalry. President Sheinbaum's new security strategy continues to face scrutiny. The recent success by the Mexican army is a rare and welcome sight. Ordinary Mexicans still fear for their lives and continue to suffer from cartel violence. Only time will tell whether the Mexican army will use its recent success to launch a larger military campaign against the cartels.
And our final story is about Oscar-winning actor Leonardo DiCaprio, or rather, his lookalike who lives in Russia. Roman Burtsev went viral for his resemblance to the actor, landing gigs reenacting Titanic scenes at malls. But weight gain ended the Doppelganger's acting career, who has now been drafted to fight on the front lines in Ukraine. A look at the doughboy DiCaprio.
Meet Roman Burtsev, once an unlikely internet sensation, now an even unlikelier soldier. This Moscow-based former programmer gained a bizarre kind of fame a few years ago for his uncanny resemblance to Leonardo DiCaprio. With piercing blue eyes and a few extra pounds, Burtsev was dubbed the Russian fat version of Leonardo DiCaprio, a title no one knew was up for grabs. Burtsev's rise to fame was as accidental as a cat walking on a keyboard. In 2016, he registered on a dating site hoping to find love. Instead, he found memes. His dating profile went viral, with people marveling at his resemblance to DiCaprio. And even the tabloids pounced on Burtsev's viral moment. Within no time, the man who once wrote code was getting modeling offers. However, he didn't just lean into the DiCaprio impersonation, he belly flopped into it. In his finest work, Burtsev recreated scenes from The Revenant, dragging himself through the Russian wilderness as a colder, puffier version of Leo. He even played Titanic's Jack Dawson, reenacting the iconic song My Heart Will Go On. His fame soared so high that Burtsev quit his day job and lived the dream. Well, at least for a while. Because, as they say, all good things must come to an end. And so did Burtsev's short stint as Russia's funniest DiCaprio doppelganger. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit in 2020, the photo shoots dried up faster than Titanic's lifeboats filled up. Burtsev, stuck at home with his parents, a cat and a fridge, began stress eating, losing not only his career but also his resemblance to DiCaprio. And now, in the plot twist that nobody saw coming, Burtsev has swapped the bright lights of photo shoots for the grim reality of the front lines. With Russia in desperate need of soldiers, the DiCaprio doppelganger has been drafted into Vladimir Putin's army to fight Ukraine. The pay isn't bad, about $20,000 up front and $2,000 a month. But the risks are very real. Instead of clutching a gun for a movie scene, Burtsev now fights for his life in the harsh landscape of war. It's a strange fate for the man who just wanted to find love and fame. Instead, now Russia's chubby Leo continues to protect his nation, hoping the war ends sooner.
That does it for us today. Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day. From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
Kamala, you're fired.
I say, bring it on.
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that recovery. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on First Post America.